Hi, welcome to our hackathon connector session. In this session, we'll talk about how to create a connector for Creatio Marketplace. My name is Lena, and I'm joined today by Kirill. Hi, Kirill. How are you?
Hey, how are you, Lena? Nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing really well. All right, so I'm excited. I'm excited for this session. It's my favorite when we're connecting things. So can't wait to get started, to be honest. So what do you have in mind for us today?
So
Just
today we're gonna build a very simple connector, and we're actually gonna do this. We don't have the prepared solution. We have something to demonstrate, but in our basically environment that we are using, we will build it from scratch. And
oh, okay. Sounds very aggressive. Let's.
well, you will see that because of the tools that Creatio offers, and this is actually quite simple. So
Okay,
we have
well,
a
that's
yeah.
good. That's good. All right,
uh,
let's get going. I really can't wait to see this. Like it's my favorite part. So you've got your screen ready. Let me
yes.
switch the camera onto your screen. Perfect.
Mhm.
Take it away, Lena.
So the objective for today will be to build a connector with Google Translate. I think
Nice,
something that again can be
nice.
utilized in a variety of ways. What we will be doing today, and we will kind of work with it a little. I'll show you the environment that we currently use.
Mhm.
Basically, let's assume that we can receive information into Creatio, in this case, from a survey form in a language that I do not understand. And in order for me to process the feedback that I have received, I want to translate it. And I want it to be just done with a simple click of a mouse. And what I have here prepared, this is my development environment where I worked. We will be switching to a different one later on where we will build it.
Mhm.
Basically, as you can see, I have some sort of question with a certain score and a comment. It's in French. I don't speak French. I tried, failed.
Me
So
too.
uh, what I'm going to do is simply click this button, translate response comment, and
Mhm.
what I will see here once I reload my page is basically the translation for this comment. So using the connector to Google Translate,
Oh, okay. Very
anyway,
nice.
yeah, translation. I like the training, very useful material. I learned a lot. Again, I hope my French part there is correct because I used the Google Translate for that as well. Um,
Okay. Okay,
anyway,
so it seems that what we're going to build is we're going to build a new feature for Creatio. We will
mhm,
call it connector. We will make sure that we can feed some text into this process or whatever that you're going to build for us. And as the output of this process, you will receive translation in the language that you understand. So in this case,
yes,
it's going to be in English.
yeah,
And so we can use it for pretty much anything we want, right? Because we're
mhm.
feeding text, so we can use text from anywhere, and we will just display it or we can store it. Okay, makes sense. So let's go ahead. Let's start building this. That looks pretty exciting.
So what we're going to do, let me log in into
Mm-hmm,
our current environment.
mm-hmm,
And currently we have two other sessions that are going on and that cover other functionalities that are present in this
mm-hmm.
environment. We have our add-on basically session that covers what the surveys are all about, how they were built. And we have our template session that covers complaints section, which is a template and how we build that. So the connector is part of this overall three-part solution for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Connector, add-on, template. And what we're
Mm-hmm.
going to do with it is we're going to enhance our current environment that has an add-on, has a template section complaints. And what we're going to do is provide an ability to translate that. So before we start with anything, let's begin by creating a package, a container that will store our connector that
Mm-hmm.
that we will build in this session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my advanced settings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to create a new package that will depend on all other packages that I currently have, because we're kind of using different things from different packages.
Mhm.
We are using the survey, and I believe we're using the business logic. We're not connected to the complaint portion right
Right.
now in this example.
Just wanted to interject while
Oh, please.
your browser is loading. If you guys want to learn more about packages, the architecture of packages, how and where things need to be extended, or what's your package model should be, there is a great online training, e-learning training resource on the architecture of the product, where one of our colleagues is going into great level of detail, explaining what the package is, what gets stored in a package, and essentially giving you some recommendation how to create it and how to populate it and how to make things work. Okay, so we're not going to get into details of what a package is. We're just simply going to go and create it. But if you're interested, e-learning, that's your friend.
Mhm.
Take a look. That's a resource for you.
Yeah, and also documentation articles. There's a getting
Yeah.
started guide, so you can use that as well.
Mhm.
So what I'm going to do is simply create a new package. I'm gonna call this uh, Google Translate
Mhm.
connector. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create it and add dependencies to it.
Mhm.
So my package will be available, will be able to access things in other packages in the system. So because I need to be able to insert a new field into my survey response, which will store the translation. And because of that, I need to depend on my survey. So let's go ahead and add this. Here is my survey packages. I'm going to depend on both, just making sure that
Mhm.
I'll have everything. And I'll also depend on the business logic, just because that's the package that we used.
I don't think we need all of them, but
Actually,
that's okay. I
yeah.
mean, yeah, I don't think we need all of them, but that's okay. I mean, you can depend on whatever this is considered the final
Mhm.
package, so we can depend on whatever you want at this point.
Yeah, I think we just need the survey. So, okay,
Mhm.
let's hit apply.
Mhm. Now, in reality, when we're building a project for the marketplace, we want to stay as independent as possible, right? So
That's
if there's
true.
no need for us to connect or depend on the survey or any other package, then you probably shouldn't. In this particular case, rather than creating some additional fields, I assume that's why you want this connection.
Yes.
But if you were intending on publishing it online, then obviously you would depend on something a little bit more generic, something maybe like a product core,
Yeah.
rather than depending on our implementation of a survey. All right.
Definitely, definitely. That's
Mhm.
a very, very valid comment. It's just again for the demonstration purposes.
Mhm.
This what makes
Just.
the most sense for us right now. So
Mhm.
I have my package. I have configured the dependencies, and now what I need to do next is say that this is my current package that I will be using, because
Mhm.
right now the system doesn't know that. So
Mhm.
again, let me quickly close. I'm gonna go into the system settings. So let me find the system setting, which is called current package, and select that package from the list. As you can see, currently it was business logic that we were using up to this point, and now uh, I'm going to switch to Google Translate connector and
Mhm.
click save. So from this point on, this is the package that everything will be stored into.
Mhm.
So let's go ahead and create that additional field in our survey response that will store the basically the translation. What I'm going to do is go into the survey, find my detail. So again, for this purpose, you need to be familiar with our object structure of right now we have our feedback, which contains questions and it contains responses. Each response from a person has multiple questions, and all those answers are recorded in survey question response. That's the object where I need to insert my field for the translation. Let me again show you. Here it is. Comment, for example, no issue.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
To do that, I'm going to utilize another no-code tool, which is our detail wizard. The easiest way to access it will be by clicking Actions, Detail Setup. So I have my detail, just jumping right into it. And I'm going to add a new field to it. And as you can see, I'll mention this as well, certain connectors you can set up without being a developer. Personally, myself, I'm not a developer. I cannot code. Girl can attest to that. So,
You're getting
and
there.
I'm trying. I'm still a long way. But the point is, because of all these no-code tools that are available in Creatio, you can do that without being a developer, which is great. Again, you just need to know how to read the API documentation and know some very basic, I would say, information in order to set this up. So what I need is another string field. Let's call this comment. Let's call this translation. Translation. Let's make it multi-line just in case it will have a long comment.
And before you save anything, just go back into Pencil for a second. So what you've got here is you've got a text limit to 250 characters. Now, when we're choosing these fields, it's important to note that if your text will exceed some of these kind of constraints that you self-imposed, then things might behave in the way you didn't expect them. So the best thing that we can suggest is, if you look at the text, the original text, the one that we're going to be translating or using it as the input, kind of use that to judge. So this comment is unlimited length text. So that gives me an indication that we can paste there a very long paragraph. And unfortunately, we only have up to 500 character limit. Now, that technically should be enough for us, but French is somewhat verbose. So it's possible that we're going to have translation perhaps longer if you're translating into some other languages. So just kind of exercise common sense when you're choosing the fields. Otherwise, you may get some truncated results that are unexpected. Now, the disadvantage of using this approach is that unlimited length text is really a text field that is very long, and it's not the most efficient way of storing it inside your database. So it's kind of, a double-edged sword, where on one hand, well, you need that flexibility, but on the other hand, well, why do you declare such a huge field when you're only translating maybe, 2 or 3 words? So again, depending on your use case, use common sense. And if you're expecting long sentences, fine, go ahead, create unlimited. Otherwise, I would say 500 is probably going to be more than enough for comments. 500 words, that's what, about a page?
Yeah.
If you're writing an essay. I don't think that anyone's going to paste anything longer than that, but nonetheless, some people are
can complain. Maybe they have a lot of.
So in any event, all I wanted to say is that just use common sense when exercising, when using this. Okay. All right, let's move on.
Perfect. So now they match. So at least in this portion, we will not have any issues. I have added my field and I can continue. I'm going to just save. I've gotten a message basically notifying me that one of the fields that are necessary to populate is not on the page. It's okay. I know it's going to be populated the way my responses are inserted, so I'm not worried about that. So the system does notify you that maybe there is something you need to watch out for.
What happens here is, you see, we have those red asterisks on the left-hand side next to name and survey response. And so the front end, the designer, is quite smart. It knows that those fields are required. What designer doesn't quite know, or maybe kind of skips, is the fact that we have some backend logic or maybe default values for those fields that are guaranteed to fill in those values. So we don't need to worry about the UI layer to fill them out. And so we can safely ignore this message or this warning. If you're not sure, then make sure that these fields are there. Otherwise, you won't be able to store your records. In our particular case, we can ignore it simply because we know that those fields will always have values. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. So let me hit OK. I can close my tab. can refresh and see that my changes have been implemented and I have a new field on the page. Let's check that before we move on to the next step. So always make sure that you have added everything, that everything is working correctly. No need to rush. So here's one of the responses. Let's double click, comment, translation. Perfect. So next step will be to set up the web service integration with the Google Translate. You do that in the System Designer in the Web Service Integration Setup. This is, again, another no-code tool that you can use for the integration. And while it loads, okay, we have two types of web services that it works with. We have our REST services, and we have our SOAP services. Kirill, I think here you can assist me in explaining.
It's just a different messaging format. So they're using underneath. It's the same thing. It's an array of bytes that is being transferred from one place to another, but those bytes kind of have a different messaging. So think of a letter that you're sending, right? So you can send a postcard, you can send a regular letter, you can send a parcel. Okay, so these are different things, and it's essentially how the payload, the data, is encoded. And for all intents and purposes right now, let's just stick to REST. This is the new and modern format. SOAP is kind of, it was very popular, let's say 10 years ago, but it's not going away. It's used for, it has specific use cases, but right now, most of the internet is moving towards REST because it's considered more efficient. It's not as verbose, not as wordy. So REST is the way to go. And so we're going to build REST, and Google speaks REST, not SOAP.
Yeah, that's true. So before, when we start configuring the setup, we need to enter the web service address. And the example that I'm going to show you is, again, more of a simple approach. If you're not a developer, this is the approach I like to take. When you have an actual response, if you have this response from the service, when you inserted it here, the tool will do pretty much almost everything for you. Let me show you what I mean. So let's take a closer look. 1 second, let me pull up my other browser with the Google API. So first of all, with the Google Translate API, you have to have a key. So you have to register and then request an access key. It does have documentation explaining basically how to work with this service, so you can read what you're trying to access, which parameters you can insert into your request, basically. So for example, you have the text, you have your source language, you can have your target language. You don't have to have the source. For example, the Google will understand which language you're trying to translate from, but sometimes the languages can be very close to each other. So obviously, depending on your approach, source could be good. Today we'll just
that's one thing, and then don't forget that this is not a free API. So Google will actually end up charging you if you exceed certain limit.
Yes,
and every time you talk to Google, every time they respond with something, they will charge you, right?
Yeah.
So Google doesn't talk to you free of charge unless it's an advertising.
Yeah.
So if you want to save on your expenses with Google, you want to talk to them as little as possible, and you want to send your request with predefined parameters. And so your source, if you know what your source is, send it, because then Google doesn't need to detect it, and so it's not going to charge you for language detection. If you don't know what the source is, which is our particular application, we don't know what the source is, we're going to ask for both, I assume.
Yeah. So, and here in the documentation, you can see what type of response you can get. Here, in another tab, I configured basically based on the URL, my key that I was provided, right? And basically the text, I have this response translation. My problem was not resolved, for example, and it's translated from French. The reason I'm showing you guys this is because, again, if you're a business analyst, the easiest way to work, from my perspective, at least that's what I found, when you have the exact response, you can copy paste it into Creatio, and it's going to break it down into the necessary parameters. So you don't have to configure it by hand, which I think is very, very useful. So let's go ahead and go back to our main environment. Here it is. And I'm going to click OK. So here, as you can see, there was a web service created with a standard name, which I'm going to change right now because this is not super user-friendly. But the useful thing that was created is the method itself. So I'm already saving a lot of time by not configuring this myself. So let's go ahead and change this name. So later on, we're not Google Translate. And then I'm going to go into my method and modify it just a little bit. So because while it does set up your request parameters, we just need to double check them, right? And then we need to set up our response parameters. So as you can see, the complete address of my my URL is broken down into parameters. Here they are, and here they are in Creatio in the method setup. Key is basically my API key. Target is my language, and Q is text. If I don't like the name of it, for example, well, this is a bit, for Google it makes sense, but maybe for my user it doesn't. So I can change the name of it, and later when I set up my business process to launch this particular web service, it's going to be easier for me to understand, right? Because Q, what is Q really? Unless you went through the setup, you might be a little bit confused. So I have an option to modify the names that will be displayed later on to my user. So other than that, I will not make any changes to my request parameters. Now, what about response parameters? Right now, they're empty. Right now, Creatio doesn't know anything about what it's going to receive from Google. And here again, the tool comes in handy with a quick setup option. If you, since you already saw that I have an example of my response, I can insert it here. The example, if I have it in JSON, and again, Creatio will then split it into necessary parameters. So let's go ahead and go through the quick setup. And let's return here. And what I can simply do, select the entire response, Control C, Control V. As you can see, Google returns a collection with translated text and detected source language. So I can click Save these parameters. If I want to, again, I can modify their names, but these ones seem pretty user-friendly. I have my detected source language if I need it, and I have my translated text, makes sense. So really, in terms of the setup for this particular API, I'm not doing a lot of changes, but double check one of the things, the data type. That's often something that you need to change. So if it's not correct, you might have some issues later on. For example, integers and decimals, right? If Creatio says it's an integer, but actually it returns a decimal, you need to pay attention to little things like that. So in terms of the setup for us right now, we're done with setting up this web service.
Do you know what this send test request button does, Lena?
Yes, we can test whether our setup was correct. So let's go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Yes, let's save this. And even before adding this this into our business process, which is usually how the web service is launched, I can test whether I have entered anything correctly. So let's populate these values and see what we will have. For the key, I will return again to the Google API. Let's go ahead and copy this. Okay, key. Then let's do target. We're going to translate it into English. And let's do text. So I have prepared, again, text is going to be in French. Send request, and let's see our response.
Oh, nice.
Here, yeah, here it is.
Can you switch to JSON tab? You see on the top, there is a JSON tab. So if we switch to JSON tab here, so we're getting the entire JSON. So really, we don't even need to use that external API or external browser. We can do the whole thing from within Creatio. All we need to know is really we need to know the URL from documentation. So again, that's a skill that many developer can envy you. So we need to basically read the documentation. We need to construct our request or paste it into Creatio. It will figure out how to encode the whole thing. And then we can just use the send test request to get that data, copy paste, and it will create the parameters for us and it will parse it. So really everything that all the hard work is done for us.
Yeah. Okay. So this tool, the test has been added, I think, 2 minor releases ago, which is great, I think, and it works really well. Okay. So, yeah. Perfect. So this is our test for the web service. Now it's time to build the process and connect.
Before you go ahead, one thing that I wanted to point out here is you see on the right hand side, you've got this thing called response timeout MS.
Yes.
So this is a response in milliseconds, and sometimes web services are, well, I mean, Google is great in terms of the response time, right? So it's really fast. It's got awesome infrastructure, and it is unlikely that you're going to experience some delay in receiving a response. However, you're not always this lucky. And sometimes you end up calling services that are perhaps a little bit slower, or maybe they just do more work and they simply cannot respond faster. So in here, you can configure how long to sit and wait before say, you know what, I give up, I throw my hands up, I have no idea what's going on, right? So here we can say, let's wait for 5 seconds. If we don't get a response in 5 seconds, then we consider that an error. But we can bump up this value. So let's say 15 seconds or maybe some other values that you want to provide here. And that's especially important when you're querying something that's going to be responding not right away, but let's say in a certain amount of time. So that's an important setting. Just don't forget about it. By default, 5,000 is more than enough, but you can always bump it up. Okay.
True.
And if you click OK here, I wanted to point out one more thing. Here you've got retries on call failure, and you've got a little bit of a tip there. You see this where it says 0, retries in top right corner. Yeah. So what this basically means, if the response has an error, we can try again. So developers might correlate it to poly policies, and that's exactly what's being used. And non-developers just forget what I just said. And this is what a lot of work that you would put in configuring your web request and making sure that you're handling and building the resilient web calls. In Creatio, it's basically done for you automatically. So developer, non-developer, doesn't matter. Use these tools. They provide a lot of functionality. So, all right, let's move on. Sorry.
No, thank you. These are valid comments. And again, they enhance my presentation because, well, I am not a developer. So thank you, Kirill. Okay. So let's hit close here. And the next thing that we are going to do, close. Okay. We're going to jump and build our business process. So let me jump into the process library. And then my process will be launched manually. Again, right now we don't, there could be some logic that maybe if you detect that the language is foreign and so on. But right now we're assuming that somebody looks at the responses in the survey form and says like, okay, I don't understand what it says. So
good enough.
let's go ahead and build our process. So with the process, what I'm going to do first, give it a name, and this name will be visible to the user. So make sure to title your process that it makes sense, because when the process is launched, the name will be displayed. Translate response comment. So since this process is launched manually per exact record, we need an exact comment. We need our parameter that will basically take our record ID, and then the process knows which text to take from it and send to Google for translation. So I'm going to use my lookup type parameter. And what I'm going to do is basically say that, okay, take this record ID. This is how we are going to be, this is how we're going to know which comment we need to process.
Yeah, just hit a 5. We're on this
Yeah.
special connection to make our
Yeah.
conference work. So unfortunately,
Today is not
had a bit of a,
our day in terms of connection. Okay,
yeah, I
the
know.
good thing I'll point out with Business Process Designer, I can load everything that wasn't saved. So
Perfect.
let's
Another feature.
try again. Look up. Okay, see, now it works.
Yeah.
So let's call this response, and this is going to be a response ID. And the lookup is a survey. Let's do response survey question response. That's the exact object where the comment will be. So you need to pay attention which object you work with. And it's going to be an input parameter. We are going to receive the ID of that particular record. Next, what we need to do is read that record. We need that comment, because right now the only thing we know about the record is the record's ID. So to do that, I'm going to use read data. And I'm going to get my comment field value basically into this process. Okay, read comment. So again, this is my response survey question response. Which record, ID, we're comparing it with the process parameter that we just set up. And the only thing that we need to read is the data from the column comment.
I also like how you read from specific columns, that you're not leaving it to read from all comments. That's just also a good hygiene, just good practices. Just like in the database, you wouldn't want to execute queries like select star from a table. This is highly inefficient, and here is no different. So if you know that you only need to use one column, please do make sure that you only read one comment and never use, not never, but try to avoid using read from all columns. It's just not a good practice. I'm just giving.
That's definitely true, especially in processes like that where we really don't need anything else besides that.
Right. Our columns might contain many lookups and references. So if your request can be responded with in milliseconds, now it's going to take significantly longer and put a lot more stress. And if your process kind of gets fired often, then it will magnify and multiply, and so that you may experience some delays simply because you have misconfigured the process and you are asking of the system a lot more than you're actually consuming. So essentially, you're very wasteful with the resources.
True, very true. Okay. So this is our first step. Now we have our comment text. What we're going to do next is simply click here, and we are going to use our call web service. And in this step, we are going to select our Google Translate service. I'm going to change the title. And as you can see, I see all my request parameters. Here with the key, you have two options. You can insert the key here into the business process, or you can have a system setting. So the system setting is probably a better approach, but the simplest way would be to insert it here. So before we move on, let's create our system setting that will store our key, which we're going to use the correct approach, not the simplest one. So I'm going to click save just in case. But in the other tab, I'm going to go into the system settings and create my API key to be used here. So let's go back here. Let's go into the system settings. Add system setting. This is going to be, let's give it a name, Google Translate API key. We'll give it a code, Google Translate API key. Type, this is type text.
Text, yeah.
And the default value will be the key itself, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you can even limit it to text 50, because you have less than 50 characters there, I believe.
Well, let's double check. I think so. So let me pull up.
Keep it 250. That's not going to make a big difference. It's definitely less than 250.
Okay, so let's do 250 then. Here it is. And in the description, Google API key. Again, just providing the description for what this is used for. Okay, let's hit save and return to our business process. So here, let me just refresh to make sure that I will see the new system setting in the selection.
And some people might cringe at, having the keys exposed in clear text. If that's an area of concern for you, then there is another system setting value type, and it's called encrypted string. And you can always store it in the encrypted string and just consume it that way. Okay, so we're just for simplicity now using a text, and there's another way of encrypting it or keeping it kind of away from
other users.
Yeah.
So we're going to go to system setting. Google Translate API key, here it is, and now it's inserted into the business process. Target language is going to be English for us. Again, there potentially could be other options. Maybe you need to dynamically select that. For that, you probably need to redesign the process. But for us, we're saying that everybody uses the system in English, and whatever language we receive, we want translated in English. And the text will come from the read comment element. So it's our process parameter. Comment. Here it is. Simple as that. Now we have configured our request parameters. Now we need to basically receive back the answer and post it into the field translation. So for that, we're going to use another system action, modify data. And we're going to post. No, actually, we're not going to do that. We need a sub process. The reason for that is because we have a collection. Remember, we're working with collections from Google. And for that, Creatio processes collections with the sub process. So what I'm going to do is going to go to the sub process element. I'm going to call it post translation. Just again, based on the response type that we receive. I'm going to click another process. Is going to be very simple, kind of like one element process. And when we work with sub processes, again, a couple of steps that you would like to take, especially in this order. First, give it a name, post response translation. Parameter for the record into which we're going to post, because right now we don't know where we need to post this. This is going to be our response ID, and we will receive this response ID from the previous process. So this is survey question response input parameter. Save. Let's click save. What I like to do, again, just to be thorough, before I build my sub process, I always like to return back to the original process, insert my parameter here. Where is my parameter? Oh, here it is. Just took a little bit to display. The reason I like to do that because I don't want to forget to do that before I proceed. And I will need my response. Oh, I made a typo. Sorry about that. Response. And I actually need a text one as well. So we'll have two. And translated text. Text, and it's also input. That's the translated text will come from the Google translation. So really, we need in this particular one two parameters. Let's go back. And we'll start with translated text. Is going to come from Google Translate, translated text. I don't really need the detected language in my scenario. And my response ID will come from the process parameter. Here it is. After that, again, click save, just making sure that everything is stored. And let's proceed here to modify data and post response translation. So post response translation, into which object our response survey question response. Which one exactly? The one we have identified with the process parameter. Here it is. And we're going to take the field translation. Here it is. And whichever text we receive from Google will be posted here. So it's going to come from the process parameters. Translated text, here it is. So, and now we have our main process, we have our sub process that helps us work with collection type data. That's the response type that Google sends out, and this is how Creatio works with it. So for that reason, I have my sub process set up, and it will post the translation. Now, the final step is connect this business process to my details. So let me close these tabs and go back to my survey form. Let's go here. Open my details. So any of the responses, and here's the detail, basically where I need to connect my business process to. So once I look at my question responses, I want to have the option of translating them. So I'm opening my detail wizard again. And in here, I will connect my business process to this detail. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Let's find our main process, which was translate response comment, not this one post, but the translate one. And it's going to pass the record ID into the parameter response. So double check which parameter you're used, because right now we only have one, but you could have multiple ones. So just make sure that the correct one is selected. So I'm going to click save and save here as well. Okay, this is a quick, that was nice and easy. Let's go ahead and refresh. So once I select one of my records, right, because it's based on a particular one response, or if I open it here, actually here I don't get it. Okay, let me add one more column so I can see right away that the comment is translated. So let's remove the name one and this, and add instead comment and translation. Basically, this will help us see everything right away in one window without switching to a full page view. Here it is. Save. So different comments. So what I want to do now is show you kind of like the final result in our final demo instance, which is I'm going to send myself a survey. I'm going to post some replies in French, just again to show you the whole example, not just these little pieces. And and you will see the option that I have to translate. So what I'm going to do to send myself the link to work with the survey form. Let's go back here. Again, we go over this setup in the add-on session. So I'm going to remove that the survey wasn't sent and run process. Next, what I'm going to do, well, let's see here. I received my link to the survey, which I can take. I'm going to copy the link just so because I have multiple browsers. Here it is. I need to wait for it to load. Here are different questions that I can answer. And let's say that I want to answer them in French. So did the training meet your needs? Here it is. Something else. What? Again, if you speak French, please forgive my Google translation because I don't. And I think that this is as far as I can go. And I'm going to submit my response. Now, what I'm going to do next is go back into Creatio. In the training, now I should have a response, which is 10 out of 10. This is, yeah, we have multiple ones left from the other sessions as well. So, but if I click and open it, as you can see, all the comments here are in French. So let's go ahead and translate this response. I have to refresh my page to see the changes because right now it's unless I have the the refresh button.
I think you can just click on the header, click on the score, or click on the question, and
Yeah,
it would do the same thing.
Here, the trainer was good, as you can see. And so on. And I can work. Oh, I went all the way here. Okay. Here in the translation and so on. I can work through all of these comments and basically translate them. So
one at a time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, and I can translate them one at a time. And again, if you need to automate this, there probably is, we can think of a way that this process can be improved, but the purpose today was to show you guys how to set up a very simple connector, to show you the tools available in Creatio to do that and how to launch that connector. So I think this we've done a kind of like a good job explaining it.
Yeah. So I'm happy that you didn't finish it. So let's make few things. Let's improve a little bit upon it. And the first thing that I would like for you to do is let's open a business process. Let's go to a process library right now and find the process that is responsible for executing translation. So the one that's calling the web service.
Here, this one. Okay.
Mhm. And in the properties of the process, what I would like to do is to put a trace option. And I
Ah,
would like to show what that does, if you don't mind.
yes, of course. So,
So this tracing enabled, the first thing that I would like to talk about is the fact that the system is telling us that application may be slowed down. This is a This is true because we have to do more work. So the application will slow down, obviously, but it is so minuscule that no one will notice,
mhm,
honestly. And the amount of time or the amount of, yes, the amount of time that you will save having this information, it's overshadows anything that you might experience in the slowdown. So while you're developing, while you're in the prototyping stage or developing stage or testing stage, I highly encourage you to have this checkbox enabled. Now, when
mhm,
this checkbox is enabled, you will be able to see the responses and the request in the trace, and you will be able to see a lot more detail. So just make sure that you have it. And then if you run into issues with the business process, you will be able to see the entire request and a lot more debugging information so you can perhaps tweak it. So that's thing number one.
mhm.
Number two, let's save this as is. And
Here,
let's
a
actually
second.
open the designer for this
Mhm,
business process. And one thing that I noticed, Lena, is that we never handled, yes, this one, we never actually handled what's called an error here. Now,
mm,
sometimes we can have business processes that they run 80% of the time, but then let's say twice out of every 10 times it's not going to run for whatever reason. Maybe the text we're sending is too long, and I believe there is a limit to how much text you can send to
mhm,
Google Translate. So in cases where you violate some contract between you and Google, Google will send you some messages saying that no, you can't get it. So we need to make sure that we handle them correctly and so that our processes do not break.
mhm,
In order for us to do that, essentially what we want to do is we want to say, okay, if I send something to Google Translate and if everything went according to plan, I want to go and execute post-response translation one sub-process, and I
mhm,
would like to update my records as is. So what you have here is happy path.
mhm,
Now, what we want to do is we want to create something that is called error handling. So why don't we take terminate event, or not an event, but a terminate dot, a red dot,
mhm,
and just drag it somewhere on the screen. Perfect. So what we want to do now is we want to have a fork on the road. We want to go to the mustard element or post response if everything
mhm,
is all in good, and we want to exit the process without trying to update information with something when the response is not what we expect. So why don't you convert that sequence flow from a regular
this one.
unconditional flow to a conditional flow, and we will configure the formulas. Yeah. So
The
take
one.
the flow that connects the Google Translate to post response and
Ah,
turn it
this one.
into conditional.
Okay. Yes.
And I think my screen froze, so I having a bit of a difficulty seeing what you're doing there.
Oh, I
um,
think it's just loading. Just 1 second.
no, I can't see anything
Oh,
moving on the
okay.
screen. That's what I'm trying to say. So let me see if I can figure out what's going on here. I probably can't, but all right. So have you added the conditional flow?
It's still loading, I have to say.
Okay, it's
So,
still loading.
let
Okay,
me
perfect.
refresh.
Now I can see that it's actually loading.
Okay,
Uh,
I'm refreshing
something
because
wonky is
again,
going on with our connection here.
yeah, not a good day.
Yeah, I know.
We're trying to stay positive.
Happens.
I know, it's true. Um,
Okay, so while we're waiting for this thing, when you go in the realm of talking web services, there are things that are called response code or status code. So every time you send a request, you will get a status code. And usually there is a relationship between the numeric value of the status code and human readable value. So for example, you may have seen when you navigate to a page somewhere and you get that 404, 401 thing, right? And we all seen them. You go to a page and it tells you 401, something not found, or 404, or whatever the case might be. So those are the status codes. And the good status codes, the ones that indicate that everything went well, is going to be in a 200 range. In a
mhm,
300 range, it has a special meaning of perhaps it's a redirect or something else. And the 400, it's really bad. Something was missing. And 500 kind of means that it's a server error of some sort, that some catastrophic things happen. And, we shouldn't really be using that response for anything unless otherwise stated in the documentation. So what we want to do here is we want to make sure that our response is good. So we want to check for that status code.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go into this conditional value and let's go and do the formula. So let's take a look at the Google Translate method. And what you will see is that there is a status code and there is also a success checkbox. A success checkbox is our implementation of success. So essentially anything and everything within a 200 range will be considered a success. We can be more explicit if we know exactly what the response code is, and we can say if it's a 200, then perhaps we can go there. So in our particular example, I think success is sufficient. So double click on the success and click save.
Oh,
and so just save. And what it's going to do, it's going to say if success is true, right? So we're going to go this way. Otherwise, we want to go and terminate this process. So take another flow, take a default flow, and connect it to terminate. Now, why am I using a default flow here? Simply because it's always a good idea to have a default flow, and default flow connected to a terminate event simply means that if there is no conditional flow that we can take, we are taking this as kind of our last resort. And so we will always terminate and we will always finish our process. So that's just a good practice. Okay, and so now you can save this process. And now you have some.
1 second, I have one little question. We don't have to put the equals true. We can leave it as is.
No,
okay.
because internally it's going to interpret that as the if, and we don't need to do that. So
okay.
What you have now is you have some basic error handling, and this already improves your process by a great margin. And you've also added this traceability feature, and you've configured the whole thing in under an hour. So to be honest, to configure that in code, even if you use some external libraries to make things faster, I doubt you would be able to do it much faster. If you wanted to configure a test, make sure it's reliable, it certainly take you significantly longer. And you were also able to put it on the screen, give us a button, pass some parameters. So it's definitely not something that you can do within such a short period of time. And no matter how fast of a developer you are, it's just not going to happen. So
let's run one more test, I assume, so we
Yeah.
can show the tracing. We do have one more comment left. So let me open this up again. I'm going to go to my responses. Probably easier from the training because of the columns that I have chosen. Here, this is 10 out of 10. And here's the last one. So let's go ahead, translate it. As you can see.
Click on the, instead of reloading the page, why don't you just click on the comment header, table header itself, and see what happens. Very good.
One? Oh, yeah, true.
Okay, so it's the same thing. It essentially refreshes the page and it picks up whatever the changes are.
True.
So now let's head out to the tracing and take a look at the trace that we have configured. So the trace will only be visible in the last instance of our Google Translate.
Here you can see that it is available.
But trace is not available on all elements. Not all elements will have trace attached to them. However, in our case, we're only interested in the trace for Google Translate. So let's select Google Translate and show trace data. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing a lot more parameters than we asked for. You've got element parameters. So why don't you roll it up? You see on the second line, you can kind of collapse that thing a little bit.
These ones?
Element parameter to your left.
Oh, okay. So you want me to collapse this?
Element parameter. No, the element parameter. Yes, perfect. No, expand the root. No, just collapse the element parameter, second line, please, and collapse the process parameter.
Okay.
So whenever you're configuring trace, you will always, if trace is enabled, you will always have two elements, the element parameter and the process parameter. Process parameter will relate to all parameters of the process, so things like record IDs and whatever other variables that you've created. And there'll always be the same number of parameters. The value might be different, but the number of elements will be the same. And the element parameter in this case relates to our Google Translate. If we look at some other element, obviously element parameters will be different as the element itself is different. Now, if you're looking inside this element parameter, let's expand that. Inside this element parameter, you will see a lot of details. And essentially, one of such parameters is going to be parameter success. You see the parameter success and any other parameter will have something called before execution and after execution. So it's a nice and easy way for us to debug. So in this case, we're seeing that we started off with the process being not a success, and after we ran this element, it became a success. And this is what we conditionally compared. You remember we added that conditional
Yeah.
branching?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
this is what we're comparing.
Yeah.
Also, if you roll down, you see that there is an HTTP status code, and it's telling you that before it was a 0. Okay, well, technically it was nothing there, but because it's a numeric value, it has to have a value. So it was a 0, and now it's 200. So not only can we use success as our conditional branch, we can go even more explicit, and we can say, you know what, let's compare it for 200. We're not going to do it now. It's the same formula. You know, we can just simply say HTTP status equal 200, and that's the same thing. But this is what this tracing gives you. Also, another interesting thing is that response body will contain the entire body of the response. So if you select what's inside this response body, you'll see that this is the JSON that was returned by Google. And so when you're troubleshooting your web services, this response body is going to be very important because it's probably going to tell you if you sent something incorrectly. Most of the APIs will tell you what you did incorrectly, and it will try to guide you. You can also see other elements that we have not subscribed to inside the business process. In this case, we see that it was detected as a source language for FR. And so in this case, we can refer to documentation. We'll find out that it's French. So very good. This is basically how you would troubleshoot. But at the end of the day, you get all these features with a couple of clicks of a mouse, and you can configure it within an hour. And now you truly can build connectors and APIs and do all those things, and can really consume external services with the help of low-code tools. So it's really, really powerful.
Yeah.
One more thing.
Yes.
What I wanted to do is, you remember we've created a system setting. And so now, because we intend on moving this package from place to place, we need to make sure that we data bind. So let's go into the backend and let's make sure that we data bind this system setting. Now, when we're doing a data binding, we have two parameters that we need to data bind. First, we need to bind the system setting itself. We're going to do it together, and we're going to talk through it. When we created system setting, you remember the values that you had to choose? You had to choose
it was
the
text
or length. You had to fill in the code. You had to fill in the name, and there's a bunch of other things such as created on and who created it, right? So those things are values. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to click here on add, and you're going to choose data. And we're going to include the definition of the system setting. So the object that you want to grab the values from is going to be called sys settings or sys setting. I don't remember if it's plural or not.
Okay. Object sys
setting.
Settings.
Settings. Okay, perfect. So in here, what we want to bind is we want to bind all those values, and we can keep it at default. So let's just switch to bound data tab and click add and search by name and just type in Google. It should find it.
So there are a couple ones. So let's see.
So you need to find the one that's yours.
Well, here, translate API key. Here it is.
Perfect. So let's click select. And let's save this. So what we're doing at this time, we're essentially defining the columns that are being stored. So you see, you've got the columns such as name, description, the type of it, that it's a medium type, whether or not it's cached. So these are the settings that we're including in the package. Let's close this. Now, this is not enough for us to actually include what we want. Now we need to include the value that fits into that definition. So we're going to do another system bind. We're going to bind another value. So click add. And now you're going to be doing syssetting value object. Search for it. Syssetting
value. Here it is.
value.
Found it.
And the way it's architecturally designed is so that the value relates to the actual syssetting. So go to bound data, please, and click add. In the left top corner, switch it to system setting.
And find the name by name. That
exactly, and just type in Google. That's good enough.
So let's.
And
Google.
you've got some system setting, and you can see that here you're actually getting a value. In some cases, the entire JavaScript files, and somewhere here we're going to find our Google Translate API. Perfect.
Here it is.
Now click save.
Okay. Do we need the
No, you can choose it. It's okay. Actually a read.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so click select. And now what you're seeing is that you've got syssetting value in the name of this data bind, right? Now, why don't you put syssetting value underscore, so rename it to underscore Google Translate API key. And the reason I like doing that is in this package, it's fairly basic and you only have one system setting value. But if you have multiple bound, you want to tell the difference which one's which, because sometimes you need to come back and reattach them or grab the new value. So you don't want to be looking which one's which. So click save now, and let's compare and contrast the first time we did it, or with the system setting, and the second time. So let's close this. And so what you're seeing, or once we save it, what you will see is that your system setting, the last row right now, right? Or you can filter it for, yeah. So what you're seeing is that it says sys settings. What's in there? Who knows? I have no idea what's in there. However, if you look at the next line, it says syssetting value Google Translate API key. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory. So if I know that I go into my system settings and I change this value, and let's go ahead and do that because we have no intention of publishing your API key, even though it's going to be deactivated. But for sake of example, let's go ahead and do that.
Let's go in system settings and delete it.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
In system settings in the first tab.
Okay.
And let's find this Google Translate.
Here it is.
Yeah. Open and just replace this with some gibberish. Okay. And click save. Okay. Now let's go into your second tab. Open syssetting value API key. Yeah. And switch to bound data, and you see your bound data is still old value. So at this point, just because you change something in your system setting values, it doesn't mean that your value that is bound to the package is bound. Now, some people, it's confusing. So it's not really bound data, it's copied data at the time that you've created this record here. So what you need to do is you need to click on this actualize data. Okay, now you see the new value has been pulled in, and now you need to save it. And so now when you're publishing your package or you're distributing it, this value of K, W, OK, etc., will be moved with your package. Otherwise, your real API key would have been moved. Right? So this is an important thing to remember. And my recommendation when you're doing something that requires data binding is to immediately go and create data binding for all the values that you believe need to be bound. And then immediately before you publish or immediately before you move it from place to place, make sure that you go reattach. And we had a number of examples where people just forget to attach it, and it's a minor mistake, but then it causes the installation to fail, or it causes something else because the system is looking for a value that simply does not exist. So it's no system fault. It just, we forgot to do something. Okay. And if you're interested online, I believe there is a package or there is an add-on that already helps you with the binding.
There's one for binding. So it becomes a little bit easier just by click on the button versus the manual steps that we.
So it just makes things a little bit easier, but in essence, now you at least understand what data binding is.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, perfect. What else we have? Do you have anything else for us? Or
no, this is it for the connector. I mean, we looked at
so let's
the way to. So I
So
did
let's
execute.
see at our objectives. So we did our live demo. Let's point out that everything that we did in this package is available in repository that you see on your screen right now.
Mhm.
So go ahead and download everything. Mind you that because we have changed the text value and the key that we were using, obviously,
Mhm.
is going to be deactivated immediately as soon as we stop
Mhm.
this broadcast. So it will not be available. So don't try using it.
Yeah,
And
get your own.
yeah, exactly. Get your own. You can subscribe, and it's fairly straightforward. And if you do have any questions related to this track, related to this package, or any other packages that are provided as part of this repository, please feel free to raise GitHub issue or write us directly by email, or even contact support if you if you so choose. And
Or
we
join
really
the
want
live
to,
session at
or
12
join the live
p.m.
session.
Yeah,
Yes.
we will be live. We'll have
But
30
if you
minutes.
happen to miss
True.
a live session, then if you want to go come back to us maybe a couple of days later, then we do want you to succeed. So we want you to, we're here to help. Okay. All right. I think this is it for us, Lena.
Yep.
Yes. So thank you very much for joining. Hopefully this was informative session for you, and we can't wait to see what you guys will build in the next couple of weeks. So thank you
Yeah,
very
we're
much.
excited for that. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.